Hey everyone, Eric Watson here, freelance writer, player of games, writer of words, recorder of videos, and tabletop role-playing aficionado. Welcome to another DM's Guild review, my written and video view series. We take a look at the adventures and supplemental material at the Dungeon Masters Guild website. For this video, I'll be reviewing the mini-adventure When Madness Calls, designed by Isaac Mandagie for Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition. A review copy has been provided for the purposes of this review. If you enjoy my videos, consider using my affiliate links if you're online shopping and supporting me via patreon.com/roguewatson. Shoutouts to Platinum patrons Joe, Will, Tiny Dancer, Manuel, Wizard Princess, Christopher, Star Loverly, Thomas, Ldugs92, Ian, James, and Captain Mike. Gold patrons RPG Papercrafts, Charming Grenade, Pretty Boy, and Yuma, Marcos, Did Vicente, Gilberto, Adam, Dead Lizard Lounge, Sam, Ross, Limpy Spuds, Jerome, Fatboy619, Sclinia, Nick, and Party McButterpants. Thank you all very much for your support. In case you can't guess, When Madness Calls is a Lovecraft-inspired adventure, given the actual character the author H.P. Lovecraft appears as a NPC character in this adventure, which is kind of a fun touch. And we've seen that in some other adaptations. I think Finding Neverland did that, Johnny Depp. And not too long ago, I watched that John Carter Disney movie, and Edgar Rice Burroughs is actually a character in that movie, so that kind of happens. It's a mini adventure for 6th level players. It takes place almost entirely within a mansion, which is the home of what is his name? Hubert Pierre Lawrence, which is the stand-in for H.P. Lovecraft, a writer of horror fiction stories in the Forgotten Realms, has recently gone missing, although it's more that he just hasn't left his house, I guess. Nobody's seen him come out of his nice mansion in the town he's at. So, and his latest story is long overdue, so you're hired to go basically knock on his door and say what's going on. And of course, it's a bunch of evil, nasty, cultist shenanigans going on. I like a lot of the art in this adventure. I love the maps. I like a lot of the ideas that are used in here. For example, there is of course a cult, and it is initially at least non-hostile, which I think is a really nice thing to add, giving the players a chance to kind of mingle and do more social encounters, at least until the third act. Unfortunately, it also feels like a lot of the story is underdeveloped in a lot of ways, because all those minglings that you can do, those social encounters, none of those are actually scripted or given any kind of like notes. In fact, all we get is like a bulleted list of things that the cultists know. The only events we have are in the very beginning and the very end, which it starts with the players arriving in the town, which this particular town, it is set in the Deseron Valley, which if you've played Prince of the Apocalypse, you're very familiar with that region, but otherwise you could basically put his mansion anywhere that you wanted to. The players are dropped off at the town, where there are basically 2 NPCs they can interact with. Well, I guess 3. Technically, the woman who drops you off, you could talk to her, but doesn't have a whole lot of information. There's 2 NPCs otherwise. There's one who is the tavern owner, whose partner has gone missing. Recently been picking mushrooms in the forest, and just hasn't ever returned from that. Of course, there's a foreboding forest nearby, bum bum bum. And the other NPC is actually the BBEG of this story, which is Arabella Hazred, which is a great freaking name, with really amazing art, by the way. This is original character art and battle maps. I need to credit the artist, Cita AF. Does an absolutely amazing job. These are incredible portraits, and we do get some really nice looking battle maps that I will show you in a bit. I love the boldness of being able to meet and talk to the cult leader, who is just basically handing out pamphlets. It really seems like it's a mundane, realistic, religious, I don't even know if I would use the word cult, because we see this, like, popular religions in our world do this shit, like where you just have somebody just, is handing you out pamphlets and telling you about the goodness that is Thara's Dunes. So I won't make I'll stay away from making any real world parallels here, but it does lend an aura of authenticity to what's going on here. And I like that the players can talk to her. Of course, they can make insight checks or religion checks, try to figure out what she's all about. But as the DM, you're supposed to be pretty loose and goosey with what she knows. And she even does like a little Scientology thing where she like asks them a bunch of processing questions or like personal things, like, do you feel despair and all this. And then she invites them to join their order, and they can just waltz right into the dungeon entrance, which is Lawrence's mansion. So that's actually a pretty neat little opening if the players want to take her up on it, and that allows them to go in with more of a, not a heist thing, but at least, you don't have to just go in guns blazing. In other words, you can go in with a social encounter and talk to the cultists inside, or you could follow the trail that the tavern owner has given you, which takes you into the forest where there's a pond with a pulsing mass and a bunch of nasty green slime everywhere, and the mass actually turns out to be a star spawn Hulk, which this is level 6. Star spawn Hulk's a pretty good little mini boss fight. And then you can find a hidden entrance into the back part of the dungeon. So I really like there's 2 main entrances into the dungeon. Although you could tell the Arabella lady to screw off and then make your way to the dungeon, of course, yourself if you wanted to. The only bad thing about that back door entrance is you get a little too far in using that one. So there's 2 levels to the dungeon. Or sorry, 3 levels actually. There's a ground floor and an upper floor, and then there's a hidden cellar that has all the real evil shit going on, as you can imagine. And if you take that Starspawn Hulk pond entrance, you end up basically appearing in that cellar, which just feels like you're skipping too much content. I mean, you could go back up and explore more of the stuff, but it just feels kind of a little anticlimactic at that point. So you get a little too far if you take that back entrance. So there's a bit of disappointment there for having the alternate entrance, which I usually like seeing for sure. There's a really neat art of the Starspawn Hulk. So the main twist here is the story really doesn't have that many. I mean, it's pretty much exactly what you think, which there's this evil cultist doing evil cult shit here. They're trying to contact in this case, Tharizdun, one of the, elder, I guess he's just a god, right? Not necessarily one of the elder evils, but definitely associated with madness and horror. And this cult has been attracted to him because of his writings. They have read his books, they're big fans, and they view him as a prophet of the things that are coming, because they think all this horror stuff that he's been writing are things yet to come, which is kind of a neat concept. And it turns out that those are the whispers of Tharizdun, getting messing with this author's mind. So the only real twist is that the author himself is actually a willing participant in this whole cult thing, and he's just kind of chilling in the cellar, in this altar, surrounding by these basins of blood, and just kind of awaiting this transformation as he writes the final pages of his book. Which I think it's supposed to be a neat twist where he's actually writing as the characters come in and all that. It's almost like a just meta commentary on the actual adventure itself, which is kind of a neat thing. But there's no chance to convince him otherwise. There's no satisfying social encounter with the author, just like there are no satisfying social encounters with any of the cultists. Instead, we just get this series of bullet points that just explains what all the cultists know, how to get around, what the passwords are, what you need the keys for different things, the fact that Arabella is from another planet, of where Tharizdun is, worshipped. And it's just, I would have preferred if instead of that method, we had scripted events, multiple events, or break it down by room and say, hey, because otherwise, I mean, this dungeon is huge. It's a 22-room mansion. It's a huge dungeon for, and I'm not even sure I would classify this as a one-shot, which I don't think the designer does. I think it's a 5-hour, which is maybe just outside the range of what I would consider a one-shot. It's a very large dungeon, and a lot of the rooms just have cultists in it that are just kind of doing normal stuff. They're in the kitchen making food, they're in the dining room eating, they're hanging out in the lounge area. There's not really a lot of evil cult shit going on because it's just a dude's house, which I think is a good twist. I like the fact that you can go in, see that there's these people set up, and you might think there's something sinister going on underneath, and that's part of the neat little Lovecraftian theme, is that there's always this evil stuff just on the periphery that you're trying to uncover. But I don't think the adventure does a great job necessarily balancing that, because it's basically all just in the cellar at the end. It just seems too condensed, and there's not enough interesting stuff to do in the actual mansion itself until you get to that cellar. It's just, and there's no notes about what if the players start a fight in this room? Does it just bring the whole damn cultist dungeon down upon them? What kind of social checks can we do to gain that information? Would there be, I just feel like there's a missed opportunity for lots of interesting And I think the best way to do it would be scripted events. So like, hey, here's 3 or 4 things that can happen. You know, maybe they bring in another recruit who's really upset and they can placate them. Or, you know, there's the 2 cultists are whispering in a corner and you can overhear this conversation. Like that kind of thing. It wouldn't be, I'm not necessarily asking for an entire additional like side quests or anything like that, but just expand on what's going on to bring the cult to life more, because I think that is a really great idea to have a non-hostile cult that the players can just walk around with and talk to, but then you don't actually have any of those events. Like you set it up and then you didn't actually give me the content that I wanted. There's a few treasure chests the players can discover. There's some hidden, actually I don't think there's any secret doors. There is Arabella's familiar is this really creepy cranium rat named, what is his name, White something, who's guarding the treasure chamber. All that stuff is fine, but there's not enough good stuff with the cult themselves. And then once you make it into the basement, then you get to the really evil, which again, that's where that sewage line, if you take that back path in, just drops you off into that basement. In fact, let's go ahead and skip ahead to the map so you can see. First of all, as I mentioned, amazing maps. Holy crap, huge thumbs up. These are gorgeous, full-color, detailed grid maps. 3 of them for each level of the mansion, separate DM and player versions. Everything I could have wanted map-wise. Absolutely incredible. When you make it to the actual cellar, this number 18 is the room where you appear in, I believe, if you take that back sewage entrance. There are cultists chilling in room 19, which if you interact with them or attack them, they dissolve into like worms, I think, which I think is one of the star spawn. I want to say the star spawn seer maybe. But it doesn't actually use that stat block. They just kind of go away into worms. There are star spawn manglers in these crates, and then the actual author, H.P. Lawrence, you can find in this ritual chamber with a barrier that you cannot pass. It's a very much kind of a bullshit, like, we can let you talk to them, but we're not going to let you like do anything about it because we need this scripted like ending to take place, which feels, I don't know. And there's not a good social encounter with him either. It's like, here's the things that he knows, but there's no chance to like, you know, tell him differently or convince him or do anything, skill check or nothing. Instead, the only scripted event in the entire dungeon is the one that brings us to Act 3, which is the actual ritual. So Arabella comes down the stairs, and meanwhile the players, they could be playing along this whole time. They could be donning the robes and being involved in this whole, and that would probably be the best way of running this dungeon as designed, is if the players are at least faking to be participants in this ritual, and then they can spring their ambush when things have progressed to where you're like, okay, we need to like jump out and attack now, because they like bathe Lawrence in blood or whatever it is, and then he starts transforming into this basically avatar of Tharizdun, which is beyond the scope. It's one of those where that is not supposed to happen. It's beyond the scope of this adventure. He basically transforms into Tharizdun, and at that point it's game over, man, game over. So you need to stop the ritual from happening, in which case Arabella becomes a boss fight along with some cultists. If you haven't already killed the manglers, they'll release the manglers, which the manglers will kind of fight everybody. There is a neat bit where if she gets down to hit points, which it can be tricky if, for me, who's ran a lot of combat encounters, for a villain to trigger a thing when they get low enough on hit points to where they're not going to then trigger a bunch of like attacks of opportunity or anything and still make her survive to do the thing. But she's supposed to run over to this bloodbath, and then she turns into a Star Spawn Hulk as a final boss fight, which seems kind of cool. But that's really the only event that happens, and it's a fun climax and seems pretty neat, but it just feels like there's a lot of missed opportunities for what this adventure could be, and I wonder if the designer meant for this to be a longer adventure and things were left on the cutting room floor, or if this brevity is part of the design, which I'm definitely less enthusiastic about. I appreciate trying to take a Lovecraft themed adventure into a single one-shot module, but it doesn't do the mystery investigation thing very well. I like the non-hostile cult, but there's not a lot to do with them, and it leaves a lot to in fact, there's a sentence here, I'm going to highlight this, if I can find where it says, "There are important information the characters can gain, so make sure the discussions are delivered well." Make sure the discussions are delivered well. That is basically the advice you get for the DM. Otherwise, you have to run all these social encounters and all these different events and everything. Like, don't do that. Like, give me those scripted events. Just give me some fun things to make this cult come alive. add the mystery and the sinister stuff on top of that, so people are doing things and maybe they're cooking with some weird ingredients, or there's one of them like a worm falls out or something. I don't know. Do something to add that little bit of sinister qualities to it. This adventure does use a really cool sanity system that I want to highlight, and it's actually taken from an adventure that I've previously reviewed, which is the Heir of Orcus verse 4. It expands on the sanity system from that adventure, which was also a Cthulhu thing. I wouldn't necessarily call it Lovecrafty. I'm trying to remember how that adventure ran, but it definitely had some Cthulhu-esque monsters in there, I will say that. And it does a really smart thing of separating the madness penalties between combat ones and out of combat ones. So, for example, there are situations where if somebody mutates into a star spawn or something and it's in combat, then you should be, and there's always, I think it's a DC 12 is a saving throw, or you suffer real-time insanity, which means you basically get one of these debilitating conditions, or something like the enraged spell or something where you're attacking a nearest ally, or you can be prone, paralyzed, incapacitated, frightened. All of those things are good in combat, whereas out of combat you can just wait until they wear off. So I like that the designer realized that there needs to be a difference between combat ailments and out of combat ailments, which are more of the role playing stuff. So the character experiences vivid hallucinations, or you become extremely attached to a certain person or object, or you just faint and become unconscious for several minutes. Maybe you start screaming or weeping, which could draw attention. Like, all those things are very interesting, and you don't want to do those in combat. So I think that's a really good system. And the way it works is everybody starts off, this is a very much a Lovecraftian board game thing to do, which is a lot of good, Cthulhu themed board games. You start off with a sanity score. Everybody starts off with a 5. I would probably rule that people that have higher wisdom might have better sanity. That might be interesting. That's something that the board games play with. People at different levels of, mental fortitude, essentially. But to keep things fair, you could have everybody at a sanity score of 5, and then every time they fail one of those rolls, although in some cases it's like, hey, if you fail, you drop your sanity by 2, and if you succeed, you drop it by 1. If it's like a super bad thing, like the culmination of a large monster popping out or something, and then you suffer these different insanity effects, which they start off with short term and they can go into long term, all the way into like a permanent insanity, which gets real nasty. So I think that's a really cool system, and it's used, I don't know if I would say sparingly or liberally, maybe just somewhere in the middle. Every time basically you fight like a star spawn or something, or maybe you discover something. Again, maybe I just wish this adventure were longer. I think that would be able to use that sanity system a little bit better. Maybe it's just that this adventure doesn't quite fit into what I want out of a Lovecraftian adventure for a one-shot. I would want something that's got a little more meat on its bones and has a little more involved, at least in the middle, because I think the introduction is fine. I love the fact that you can meet basically the big boss early on and have her like escort the characters and just make it this whole innocuous cult thing. And then I think the end is pretty solid with the ritual taking place, and she's got cultists and star spawn they're releasing, and she eventually transforms into a Hulk. Like, all of that is pretty nifty. So I think it's that middle part, which is unfortunately the bulk of the adventure, needed a few more pages to be properly expanded. All right, let's go over my pros and cons for When Madness Calls. Pro: gorgeous original character portraits for NPCs, and beautiful battle maps of the multi-level mansion. I put those as 2 separate pros because those are both, I usually call out maps as either a pro or a con on every adventure, and the maps are stellar, like absolutely awesome. This is just, the adventure might be worth it alone just for these maps. Just really freaking awesome maps. And I love the character portraits too. That's something that if you're gonna give me original art, then do the characters, because that really makes an adventure come to life. And throw a Star Spawn Hulk in there, because that's a really cool picture too. And pro: the expanded sanity rules and tables for multiple levels of insanity, which I just ended the review with that, but that's a really cool system. I think you could easily take these rules and apply them very effectively to any horror adventure you want to run, or any horror sequence you want to run. Just have everybody start with a certain sanity, and then make those wisdom saving throws, and then that gets reduced. And then especially the real-time insanity, you just, you fail it and you instantly suffer one of these effects. That's actually a really snappy, effective culmination of using sanity but not worrying about the long-term effects, and just say, hey, I want to do sanity but only for that adrenaline pumping moment while we're in combat, and not necessarily this overarching whole sequence I have planned. So I think that's a very effective tool you could use even outside of this adventure. And then cons, I kind of wrapped up all of my feelings with a single major con point, which is it's just a missed opportunity for more scripted scenes and social encounters with the cult. It really sets it up like you'll be able to waltz into this cult, talk to people, gain more information, do the whole growing, sinister, uneasy feeling about things, but none of that's there. And it's a shame because I think all of the pieces are set up to do that, and then it just doesn't quite follow through with what I wanted. Final verdict, though short and a bit underdeveloped, When Madness Calls hits all the right notes for a Lovecraftian dungeon crawl. Thank you to everyone for watching this video review. You can see my written review at roguewatson.com. You can support my work at patreon.com/roguewatson, and you can follow our own D&D adventures here on my YouTube channel. Thank you.